Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining me today for Stay Free with Russell Brand. Wherever you're watching us, make your way over to Rumble. And if you don't have Rumble Premium yet, get Rumble Premium now. You get additional content from me, but not just me. From Tim Paul and Timcast and Crowder and Mug Club and Glenn Greenwald and Dave Rubin and a whole host of other Rumble content creators. If you're watching us on X or YouTube, you're ultimately going to have to come over here if you want to watch my conversation with Senator Rand Paul. And it's an interesting one. Thanks, Timcast, for the raid. Thank you, Mug Club, for the raid. And we'll be throwing to the quarter in at the end of this show. In this conversation with Senator Rand Paul, we talk more broadly about the principles of libertarianism and whether or not the systems of government as they currently are can deliver anything other than continuity for systems of power. It's a brilliant conversation, and I found myself agreeing with Rand Paul on a lot of issues, except for using the metrics of materialism and consumerism as the metrics by which we might evaluate our own success. Let me know in the comments and chat what you think whenever anyone pulls a bunch of statistics that tell you, actually, in the old days, everyone only had $1 a day, and now life's fantastic. You're happy. What do you mean you feel down? You can lay on your back at home, lowering your own genitalia into your mouth. I don't know why that's the image I went for. As you know, I'm suffering from mental illness. Anyway, wherever you're watching this, get over to Rumble. Let's get into the conversation with Senator Rand Paul right away. Thank you for joining us, Senator Rand Paul. It's a pleasure to meet you in person, sir. And it's a pleasure to meet you at this peculiar junction in American political life where it seems that whatever was wrought by the unusual and anomalous emergences of Donald Trump and the reskinning of the Republican Party is now undergoing a further analysis as the second term in government sort of deviates and warps. Do you think that the big, beautiful act, as it is now, is what will come to define Donald Trump's presidency? Or will it be the Epstein list, which has, for me, become a kind of synecdoche now rather than an actual list that means, are you any different from the former administration?
I think if we step back and we look at the Trump administration and Trump in history, the big debate will be over executive power. And this isn't a new debate. We had it with the kings of England. We tried to form a republic where we limited the power of the executive. But Donald Trump has grabbed up a lot of executive power and is operating through emergency. So basically, one of the big items I think he will be remembered for is tariffs. But it's not tariffs being done through Congress, it's tariffs being done by royal edict or executive edict. And these edicts really aren't passed by Congress. They're simply him taking up this power. It's working its way through our courts. And we've had one federal court already say that he can't do it. And we'll see what happens when it gets to the Supreme Court. He's using a law that was used to allow him to do sanctions on other countries. He's using it to create tariffs. But if you look at tariffs, they're simply a tax. And in our Constitution, we have a very specific rule that says taxes must originate in the House of Representatives, go to the Senate, and then come back and be passed. The tariffs are never being passed by Congress at all. He's completely done an end run around Congress. I think the debate over how much power the executive has will be what he's remembered for. He's doing it in the hiring and firing, too. So the Supreme Court and the other courts are upholding his ability to hire and fire, and I think that's a good thing. On the issue of tariffs, I think the court will ultimately rule against him. So I think the entire regime of tariffs that is out there, there's a possibility that the legal rug is torn out from under them and that there will be a legal prohibition on what he's doing. That would be extraordinary, and I don't think many people are talking about it.
That is fascinating because I was unaware of the maneuvering that was required in order to execute these tariffs, or that it wasn't explicit in legislation the way that it's currently being engendered. But the kind of maneuvering that we're used to in Washington, as observers, comparable to, I was talking to Marjorie Taylor Greene yesterday, and she explained how the legislation around cryptocurrency has no... the initial bill doesn't afford the ability to create centralized currencies, but there's another bill that ultimately won't get passed through the Senate. And when I was listening to the sort of game of politics, as described by the Congresswoman, what you say now echoes it, that there is an ulterior and secondary politics that takes place. And I suppose, in a way, when it comes to the obviously unique figure of Donald Trump, what we're experiencing now is what the limitations of his power and personality are. And specifically on the subject of tariffs, do you regard that ultimately then as a tax on American people, or do you see it, as he appears to frame it, as an opportunity to cudgel foreign partners and control them and assert American authority and power and serve the American people?
Without question, tariffs are paid by the American consumer. Even when the business is taxed, the tax of the person bringing it in, most of the time that's Americans. So Americans make clothing in Vietnam, they make it in China, it comes over here. They're largely American companies. So if you want to tax cell phones being created in China that Apple makes, you're taxing an American company. And the president wants it both ways. He sometimes says we're going to punish China, but then he also says if Tim Cook doesn't listen to him, he's going to punish Apple. If they take their phones to India instead of from China, they make them in India, he'll punish them also. But then he's no longer talking about punishing China, he's talking about punishing Tim Cook and Apple. Ultimately, their taxes on Americans, without question, they are revenue. They're brought into the Treasury, and the vast majority of them are paid by American companies that are importing these goods into America. And then the consumer pays this because if I am making coats, ski coats, and they were $55, they're now going to be $65 because they cost more to make. I have to pass it on. Everybody passes along taxes to the consumer. So ultimately, the consumer will pay for these things.
It's interesting. It seems like in a way that it's very difficult to hack the system in a way, whether it's the Epstein list or the imposition of tariffs, at least superficially, as a kind of a weapon against foreign trading partners or other powers. Ultimately, the system has methods for sustaining itself that mean that the forfeit is always paid by the consumer. And do you think that alludes to a deeper crisis in America? Because sometimes there's this level of conversation that seems to me like we're discussing sort of stratagems, and I know it's not abstract, I know it's sort of literal and legalistic, but do you concurrently sense there's a sort of crisis in the American psychic and spiritual life as people begin to recognize that the sort of populist MAGA promise can't really be delivered precisely because of what you've explained, even with this one example?
I think ultimately nationalism and populism is sold by having an enemy. Some enemies are very easy to conjure. Some enemies already have some bad attributes, and we can play those up. So China plays the perfect role. They do things that aren't particularly savory. They steal intellectual property. They are protectionists themselves. And so it's very easy to say, well, China, we must do something about China. But then they extend it to others, and they say, well, this is easy. We must have this villain, and these foreigners must pay. But really, the Americans pay. The average American goes to Walmart, shops at Walmart, saves about $1,500 to $2,000 a year because of international trade. So they are richer. So really, instead of saying, I'm going to get China, you need to say, oh, that guy that makes $30,000 a year that has a pickup truck and 2 kids and barely gets by and has no money left at the end of the month, no money after rent and gas and all of that, that's the guy that's paying $2,000 or more because he has to shop at Walmart because they have the best prices. But the prices are going to go up by $2,000. That's the guy getting ripped off. But it's built upon this whole sort of fallacy that if I buy something from you, that somehow someone's getting ripped off. The truth of the matter is this: there is no trade that is not mutually beneficial. So if I want to buy advertising on your show, you can't force me to do it. I only buy it because I like your product or I think I get to a lot of consumers. So it's voluntary. Nobody buys ads from you on your show is being ripped off. But what if I do a big circle around them and they're all from China? And I say, oh, we have a trade deficit with China. We're all getting ripped off by China. But each individual trade was mutually beneficial. So if let's say 1 million people buy a TV at Walmart and all the TVs are made in China. That's not true, but let's just say it's true. Each person that went in there paid $600. They gave $600 willingly because they wanted the TV more than their $600. Walmart wanted the $600 more than their TV. So it was a voluntary trade. All voluntary trades are beneficial. But how can 1 million people have a voluntary trade where they buy a TV from China and they're all happy because they gave up their money voluntarily, and then you draw a circle around it and say, oh, well, they're all made in China, we got ripped off. How can 1 million voluntary, positive, mutually beneficial trades be summed up as being ripped off? It's a fallacy. No one's being ripped off in trade. In fact, we've become extraordinarily rich through international trade. From the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but really even after World War II, if you look at prosperity's been doing this, which leads to the other fallacy. They say, oh, the middle class is being hollowed out. The middle class is being ripped off by trade, and the middle class is worse. We don't have manufacturing jobs. If you look at household income from 1970 to the present, 50 some odd years, household income is being doing like this. The lower class is getting richer, the middle class is getting richer, and so is the upper class. The middle class isn't being hollowed out. If anything, they're moving up into the upper class. The one group in America that's grown more rapidly than any other group is those making $100,000 and more in constant dollars. So it's based on fallacy. The whole notion that we need to protect ourselves and have impediments to trade, it's a fallacy and will make us poorer.
We can't make this content without the support of our partners. Here's a message from one now. The world is divided socially, politically, culturally, economically, maybe even in your own genitalia, if you're Brigitte Macron. We need to understand the financial markets. We've been lied to. We've been distracted. We've been controlled. If you know me, you know I don't understand finance, Bitcoin. I don't understand cryptocurrencies. I don't understand the Federal Reserve. I don't understand the deficit. I didn't understand the 2008 global crash where they bundled together subprime mortgages to exploit the ordinary people of America, a crime that has still not seen anybody arrested or charged. What I do know, though, is that there are ways that Robin Hood organizations can get together to empower you to make sensible investments now. And that's where Alio Capital comes in. Wouldn't it be great if there was an investment app that was designed by people that understand a macro perspective and how global events affect your finances? Yes, please. Now you can have the power in the palm of your hand with the Alio Capital app powered by Altitude AI, which identifies shifts in inflation, interest rates, and global risk, then adapts portfolios in real time. Alio is designed for hands-on or hands-off investors. Macro investing for people who want to understand the big picture. Download their app in the App Store or at Google Play, or text my name, Russell. This is the simplest one. If you're like me and you don't understand technology and you want to be stinking rich and you want to take advantage of Alio app, text my name, that's Russell, R-U-S-S-E-L-L, see it now on the screen, to 511. 511. Download the Alio app or text Russell to 511 511 today. Investing involves risks. Of course it does. Everything involves risks, including the potential loss of principal. What? You won't catch me losing mine, baby. Past performance does not guarantee results. See terms and conditions. Text fees may apply. This is a paid advertisement for Alio Capital. Alio Capital, making investment easy for people like me who just don't have the time to be a George Soros or a Warren Buffett or any of them guys, but would still like to be stinking rich. So text my name to 511 511 and join the Alio revolution. If it's not true, then what is the advantage to doing it? What is being concealed by the propagation of this fallacy? Even though I would say when you describe that, which you obviously do really well, thanks for making it simple and using examples that I would identify with from my own business life. What I would contest is about, what might seem quite abstract and ontological ideas about the nature of freedom and why people are buying a TV in the first place and what America has become about, and even the fact that the sort of nominal term has become consumer rather than citizen, which I guess is a step up from subject, which is, I guess, what you guys are ultimately threw off when you departed from this particular accent. But what I suppose is a more pertinent question before we get into how does America identify with itself. What is this sense of looming crisis? What is it? We can't deny it just by sort of pointing to a graph and saying the average household's got more of this and more than that, because most people feel like, hey, in the 1980s, a firefighter could feed a family of 4, and people don't feel like that no more. None of us, all of us are operating in subjectivity center. So I guess first start with what is being obfuscated by Trump's claim that the common enemy is Chinese exploitation.
They have something, a fancy name is called the availability heuristic. That means that things are more available or teachable. So for example, if you turn on the news tonight on an old-fashioned television, which I don't really recommend, but if you do, you'll see mostly bad news. And so you'll see violence and you'll see crime. Yeah. But really, if you say how many of my fellow man are committing crimes, it's really 1% to 2%. So 98% of your fellow man are actually good and living peaceably. And yet we think crime is everywhere and we get inundated with this availability. It's the same way with thinking we're not doing as well as our parents or grandparents. Oh, the 1950s. Oh, the halcyon days. Everything was so great in the 1950s. Well, a lot of people didn't have air conditioning in the 1950s. A lot of people didn't have central heat. The houses were this big. The houses are now this big. The best way to look at it is in long-term trends. There's a great website called humanprogress.org. It's associated with Cato. And in it, they look and compare us to times past. So 1820, sort of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. For all of human history, as you come along the x-axis of time, and this is prosperity and this is time, you're going a long time, we lived on the bottom, we lived on the x-axis. All of mankind lived in utter and complete poverty. 98% of people in 1820 lived on less than $2 a day. That's the definition of extreme poverty. And it went on forever. That's the story of human history until you get to 1820. The Industrial Revolution hits and prosperity explodes. So I was married in 1990. 98% of people at 1820 are in extreme poverty. In 1990, only 34% of the people in the entire world, not just America, not England, Bangladesh, India, you mix the whole world, 30% lived in poverty, 1990. Fast forward 35 years, less than 10% of people live in extreme poverty, $2 a day, constant dollars. This is an extraordinary story, and no one's hearing it because people will get on and prattle on about the middle class is being hollowed out and we're all going to hell in a handbasket. The story of and the optimism that should come about where we are in history, I tell the kids all the time. I speak to young people, I say, never been a better time to be alive. Best time ever to be alive. People are more tolerant. People are more open to who you are. You can be who you want to be. People don't care for the most part. Never been a better time to be alive. People are more prosperous than they've ever been. But it's the opposite of what people believe. Everybody believes we're going to hell in a handbasket.
Well, of course I can't speak for everybody, and sometimes I would contest whether or not I can accurately or at least articulately speak for myself, but I must, in the strongest possible terms, afford you that I strongly believe the opposite. Whilst I can't dispute the facts of material success generated by industrialization and mechanization and our ability to maneuver matter and create consumer markets, I sense and intuit, and forgive me for not having the data sets, but we are in a time of extraordinary crisis. And I would describe the nature of the crisis thusly, that power is being centralized. When I say power, I mean the ability to make decisions globally, whether it's through bureaucracies like the WHO, who thankfully have lost a little of their power due to Secretary Kennedy and Trump's relatively recent decision, or NATO or the UN or the EU, sort of bureaucracies that are largely unelected, although I recognize there is some democratic process amidst them. In addition to peculiar NGOs about whom I know less, but I know that they are incredible resources and repositories for enormous wealth. In addition to sort of deep state power. Indeed, it's difficult it seems that true power has an ability to obscure itself. And I think people understand this and sense this. I think people feel that power has migrated away from them, that we don't have sovereignty in our own lives, we don't have sovereignty in our communities, and that this trend, rather than the trend you describe, which sounds like sort of a glorious carnival and a march towards utopia, is not what most people are experiencing. They're experiencing a centralized authority that's obfuscating its own power.
I don't disagree. And I would say that you can become materially more successful and spiritually poor.
Yes.
So you can be richer in a material sense and poorer in that sense. With the question of power, what I would say is you're absolutely right. Power is more centralized and it is to be feared and should be feared, the centralization of power. This has been the struggle of man, really probably from Roman times, but more specifically to us from the time of Magna Carta on. It's all been about trying to restrict the power of one person. Yes. It used to be a king. We set up our Constitution to make sure our president wasn't a king, but the president has grown in power in the last 100 years. From Woodrow Wilson on, we've had extraordinary power go to our presidency. So I'm not saying don't fear it. What I would say is that is the battle. That is the battle of politics that I engage in every day, trying to battle against the centralization of power.
Yes.
Remembering what Lord Acton said, that power corrupts, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. But also knowing that despite the ill effects of big government and of centralization of power, despite that, the power of freedom, what freedom we have left, is so encouraging and so beautiful. The individual spirit of creation. I mean, look, when I think about the times we live in, I see that and that picture, and I'm just the picture of the rocket coming back from space into the metallic arms and being caught by Elon Musk's ingenuity and incredible creativity. That is the time we should be proud of. Food. We just grow so much food. In fact, our problem is too much food now. We got too much food and it isn't all good either, but we have so much food. But our biggest problem is too much food now, not too little food.
We're going to have to interrupt that conversation now. If you want to stay with us, click the link for the rest of this conversation. I tried to edge Senator Rand Paul towards a explicit condemnation of Donald Trump, and I think he sort of tacitly offers one. He thinks that China's being used as a kind of bogeyman. He says he would no longer arm Israel. These seem to me to be the kind of things that people are interested in, or he sort of actually he was kind of, I would say, prevaricated somewhere. But in general, it's a really brilliant conversation. In fact, in full, it's an excellent conversation. Click the link if you want to join us for it.
For all of human history, there was never enough food. Obesity did not